World History, Chapter 5, Section 3, the Roman achievement. How did advances in arts, learning, and the law show the Romans' high regard for cultural and political achievements? So the things you should be able to do is summarize the works of Roman literary figures, historians, philosophers, the art and architecture developed by the Romans, how Romans applied science and math for practical use, and then explain how Rome's legal codes protected everyone in the empire. So when we look at writing of literature, one of the things that we're going to see throughout this particular section is that the Romans are going to be heavily influenced by the rest of the world, especially Greek and Hellenistic influences. And again, the Romans are more of a practical type of people. They want to be able to figure out how do you use something. They're not necessarily the most creative bunch of people in history, I guess. So when we look at poets, you see them copying and trying to tie their past to Greece's past. So when you look at the most famous epic poem, the Aeneid by Virgil, what it's trying to do is it's trying to pick up where the Iliad and the Odyssey left off and show that Aeneas was part of this Trojan War, and again, to tie the history of Greece and Rome together. So one of the other elements of Roman literature is satire. A lot of poets like to kind of poke fun at Rome and Roman society. And so that's the other thing that they're kind of really known for is being able to kind of highlight the own things within their culture and within their own society and within their own times that they think are a little bit maybe crazy or absurd or ridiculous, and make fun of it and kind of laugh at themselves. The other piece is historians. Now, the one thing to kind of keep in mind with the historians of Rome, unlike the Greeks, they're not really trying to necessarily tell an unbiased view of history. And so if you're looking for it and reading through it and trying to find out, the impartiality of history, that isn't what really Roman historians are doing. You really see one of two kind of themes developing in Roman historians. One is Livy, who focuses on the heroes of Rome and really kind of goes over the top and is talking about everything that is great with Rome and probably overdoing it. On the other side, you have Tacitus, who is focusing on the evils of Rome and all the bad things about Rome. And between these two guys is probably a little bit of the truth. When we look at philosophy, what the Romans are going to do is they're going to borrow from the Greeks. So if we look at Stoicism and Epicureanism, they're both going to come from Greek philosophers. And so if we're looking for what is it really that these two things have in common, is they both are searching for happiness in life. Through Epicureanism, it is to seek pleasure and enjoy friends and learning. So again, kind of taking a break, kicking back, relaxing, and being able to find that. With Stoicism, the goal of life is to know your duty and to do the right thing, and that's what's going to make you happy. And really, ultimately, what the Romans are going to focus on is the end game, which is happiness. And in some cases, they're going to take that to excess, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, maybe. So Rome, art and architecture. When we look at art, what Romans want is they want realism. They want emotion. And they also want to focus maybe on this idealistic view of what they think people should be like or act like. The other famous piece of art is mosaics. They're kind of famous for doing these. And a lot of these are left over, like, for example, at Mount Vesuvius. They have uncovered a lot of these mosaics. And they tell us a lot about what Roman life was like, what they were doing, what kind of was happening, some of the events that took place. So those have been left for us to kind of examine later. When we look at architecture, the ultimate goal of Roman architecture is to be big, huge, enormous, and so that it kind of represents the power of Rome. And so that's what they're going for. They're going for big things that are going to really impress people and wow people. They're going to do this through the use of concrete. The other thing is when you look at one of the things that they're able to perfect, besides the arch, is the dome. And so this is the Pantheon, which would have had all the Roman gods throughout. And it was the largest freestanding dome until we get to a little bit later on in history. So it takes architects a long time to be able to replicate these large freestanding domes because they really didn't understand how to do it or couldn't figure out how to do it after the Romans. So one of the other things that they're known for is engineering. And so here's a picture of a Roman aqueduct that's still standing. Through the use of the arch, through the use of mathematics and geometry, they're able to get this perfect slope where they're able to take fresh water from outside of the city of Rome and transport it to the city of Rome so that they have enough fresh drinking water. You know, at the height, I think Rome had roughly 1 million people living there, so they need an awful lot of fresh water to be able to sustain that kind of a population. They also are able to have heated baths and all sorts of other things that they're doing. And then if you look at, for example, the Colosseum was able to be flooded so that they could have mock battles inside of the Colosseum and then drain that water away. So what they're able to use science and math for is pretty extraordinary. When you look at the actual creation of science and math, they're kind of leaving that to the Greeks. So with Ptolemy and geometry, and then you've got Galen with medicine, those Greeks are focusing on the research part of it and piece of it, and then the Romans are going to use that and put it to a practical use. When we look at probably the longest lasting legacy, at least for the United States, maybe in Western Europe, it's the legal legacy that they leave. The codes of law that they're creating and the kind of concepts of law are pretty important. So here are a few that you maybe will recognize, that you're supposed to be proven guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt. And if you can't prove, well, you're innocent until proven guilty. The weight of the responsibility is on the prosecution to prove that you had committed a crime. It's not up to you to prove that you're innocent. It's up to them to prove that you're guilty. The fact that people have the right to face their accusers and the right to defend themselves, and that judges are the ones who are going to interpret the law and apply it in a fair manner to match the circumstances, so that law is adaptable. It's not an eye for an eye like the Code of Hammurabi. There's some reason and logic and interpretation that goes into it that helps make law what we think of as being modern law.